There was a very, very tragic event which recently occurred in Israel. So many of us are aware of it to varying degrees. And that's a complicated story. It's a complicated situation. It's a tragic situation on so many levels. The ripples of it definitely reached our community. But with your forgiveness, I'm going to leave the specific complexities of that specific circumstance to people wiser than myself. And obviously, anyone from our community who feels directly impacted or indirectly impacted by that story, if they would like to discuss it with me, I'm certainly available to discuss it. But I would actually like to take a few minutes to talk about an aspect of that story that tragically is certainly relevant to members of our community, and I believe it is relevant to members of every single community in Cloud Israel, which is reflecting on the pain of people who have experienced sexual abuse. You know, it's a very interesting thing. One of the most remarkable things in this week's Parsha, the Parsha before, the Parsha after, besides the fact that the Jewish people were freed from Mitzrayim, freed from Egypt, there's a remarkable feeling of justice. The Egyptians had tortured the Jews all of this time, and now the Jews see God torturing the Egyptians. What a remarkable arc. What a remarkable chizuk. What a remarkable feeling of strength. Not just national strength that the Jews are the Jewish God is fighting back. That, of course, is a wonderful feeling. But what a sense of a person experienced such terrible things for so long, a nation experienced such terrible things for so long, wondering if there would ever be a sense of retribution. And then they see it with their own eyes. And so many people in our times, experience terrible, terrible crimes and indignities at the hands of other people. And they wonder if they'll ever see justice. And there's terrible pain in experiencing such a thing as sexual abuse. And there's extremely challenging effects that tragically stay with a person for the rest of their lives. But another layer of the pain is to have someone wrong oneself so terribly, and then one sees that the perpetrator isn't punished. It's a terrible, terrible feeling. And unfortunately, so many people who have been victims of sexual abuse throughout the world, and certainly in Jewish society, have that sentiment. And to a certain extent, you look at this week's Parsha and you say, the Jews saw retribution. Why can't I see retribution? And we know, of course, that God in his infinite wisdom, and we don't necessarily always understand that infinite wisdom, doesn't normally make it, or it doesn't commonly make it, that we see retribution in our world, in our times. It's worthwhile to remember that, yes, the Jews saw retribution. The Jews of that generation saw retribution. There were Jews who lived through terrible slavery before these people who never saw retribution. So I'd like to just reflect for a few moments on some of the aspects of pain and challenge that a person, Rahman al-Islam, who encounters who's victimized by sexual abuse has. I don't mean to present myself as an expert on this subject. I certainly do not mean this as a complete review of the tragedy or the pain. I just feel that the news out of Israel is terrible and tragic. And if such an important topic is a little bit more on our minds than it was before, it's an opportunity to reflect. It's an important opportunity to reflect. We need to know that sexual abuse happens in the Jewish community. We need to recognize that. We need to know that there are, I know people who live in our community. I'm not aware of anyone who had an experience in our community, but I know of people who live in our community. I'm not aware, could be that there are, I hope not, but I know there are people who live in our community who have experienced sexual abuse in their lives. It's not some abstract thing in faraway lands. It happens, and it's happened to so many, and I am sure, I have no doubt that there are numerous other people who I know and interact with on a regular basis that I don't know that they've experienced sexual abuse in their lives. So just to think about that for a moment, to try to live with the sensitivity, we have a way of thinking about and talking about topics without ever imagining at all that our part of our audience could be directly impacted and pained by our words. To just think about that. You're sitting, you're talking about something or other at the Shabbos table. You don't know. You don't know who's had what experience. To reflect, I was learning in a shir this past week, in my Sunday morning shir, we were reading from Rosenbaum about the concept that so much of human interaction is predicated on basic trust for each other. The idea that a person was in a human relationship with someone else, and in some sense they placed their trust in this individual, and their trust was violated in the most terrible of ways. To think about that, to think about how difficult that must make every human interaction, how much that must taint their ability to trust other people in other dynamics. To think about how the specific aspect in which they trusted and were so terribly victimized after they trusted is an aspect of a person's body and a person's life that it's supposed to be that we create the greatest of physical expressions of affection, the greatest of physical expressions of unity, that God enables us and empowers us to create life ourselves. And with these actions and with this part of the body, that a person experienced so much pain and betrayal that a person should now, when they're hopefully having a pleasant and meaningful interaction with another person, an affectionate interaction with another person, that there should be taints of remembering the most terrible of experiences. It's hard to even grasp. But it's worth it to think about it every now and then for us, for the rest of us who, thank God, haven't experienced such a thing, to try to wrap the mind around the difficulty a person must have. And then specifically to think about how much courage it must take to come forward, how difficult it must be to come forward. To think about how for many people, one of the greatest motivations, if not the greatest motivation of coming forward, is such a selfless act that it's so painful to come forward, so embarrassing to come forward, and they come forward that no one else should be negatively impacted nor victimized by this individual. Think of the greatness of that. Think if any of us, whether as friends or whether as people in communal positions, ever have the experience that someone shares this terrible pain with us, how incumbent upon us it is to be, to the best of our abilities, sympathetic and understanding and supportive. I wish I would have some brilliant idea to share, to give us all a perspective, and much more importantly, to take away some of the pain for people who have experienced such a terrible thing. I wish I had it. I don't. But we all just need to think a little bit. It's not a far away concept from different planets. It's something that happens. It happens in our world. It happens in our broader Jewish community. And anyone who thinks it couldn't happen in their community is clearly foolish. May Hashem give much strength to every single person who's ever been victimized. And may HaKadosh Baruch Hu help the rest of us be the communities and the leaders and the friends and the relatives that we need to be for these people. And may HaKadosh Baruch Hu help us as communities to always have the clarity and understanding to protect everyone in our community, young and old, as we need to do. I'm sorry to give such a depressing message, but I appreciate you taking the time to reflect with me. Have a good Shabbos.